But in that hour Finarfin forsook the march, and turned back, being filled with grief, and with bitterness against the house of Fëanor, because of his kinship with Olwe of Alqualande, and many of his people went with him, retracing their steps in sorrow, until they beheld once more the fair beam of the Mindan upon Tuna, still shining in the night, and so came at last to Valinor. There they received the pardon of the Valar, and Finarfin was set to rule the remnant of the Noldor in the Blessed Realm. Hey everyone, Yoyston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we'll be looking at a lesser-known character from the Silmarillion, but one that I feel deserves a lot of recognition and a place in the back of all of our minds, even as we read into the events of later ages. Finarfin, son of Finwë. Please check out the links in the description and cards for more information on this character. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me. Let's begin our tale. Finarfin, the youngest of the three sons of King Finwë of the Noldor, was born in Valinor in 1230 of the Years of the Trees. He was the full-blooded brother of Fingolfin, Findis, and Irme, his sisters, and he had a half-sibling, Fëanor. And Finarfin, just like the others except Fëanor, was the son of Indis of the Vanyar, the second wife of Finwë, for the first, Miriel, died after the birth of Fëanor. Now Finarfin was different than his half-brother Fëanor in many ways, as Fëanor was temperamental, hyper-passionate, and overzealous. And Finarfin was even different than Fingolfin, who seemed to be more courageous and strong, but even less temperate than Finarfin was. Rather, Finarfin was softer of heart, more compassionate and fair, and wisest of the three brothers, as represented in his golden hair, which he had inherited from his mother and the Vanyar. It seems Finarfin and his descendants acquired more traits from their Vanyar heritage than did the line of Fingolfin. Even his name is peculiar, as Finarfin is actually a Sindarin name, but since Finarfin would spend most of his years in Valinor, where Quenya and Valarin were spoken, and he only spent a few years in the grand scheme of things in Middle-earth, where Sindar was the main language. It is strange that we do not call him by his Quenyan father name, Era Finwë, meaning noble Finwë, with Finwë coming from his father, of course, or Ingoldo, his mother name meaning the Noldor, one imminent in the kindred. Regardless, in 1280, Finarfin would further expand his personal circle outward from the domain of the Noldor, wherein Fingolfin and Fëanor kept more to their own people, and Finarfin would marry Eärwen of the Teleri, the Sea Elves of Olwe of Valinor. Finarfin and Eärwen would have 4 children together, all of whom had blood from all 3 houses of the Eldar within them, Vanyar, Noldor, and Teleri: Finrod, Angrod, Ignor, and Galadriel, who also inherited the blonde hair of the Vanyar. In the published Silmarillion, Orodreth is also said to be another son of Finarfin, yet in later writings this was shown to be a mistake, and Orodreth was moved to be the son of Angrod. Within Tolkien's works, we see that the wisest characters are those who associate with the peoples of many different backgrounds and races, and befriend all of them. Even in this alone, we see a difference in wisdom between Finarfin and his brothers. When the darkness returned to Valinor through the lies of Melkor, meant to sunder the trust of the Noldor between themselves and the Valar, Finarfin would hear the Dark Lord's words, telling that Fëanor had their father Finwë in his hand, and planned to drive both Finarfin and Fingolfin from their home of Tirion, the Noldoran city, and take all political power for himself. But Finarfin, who had not a jealous or evil heart, surely paid little heed to these lies in his wisdom, at least until Fingolfin came to him, telling of an encounter during which Fëanor threatened Fingolfin with a sword. Eventually, evil truly did return to Valinor in 1495, after Melkor and Ungoliant destroyed the 2 trees and killed Finarfin's father Finwë, and stole the Silmarils of Fëanor. The rage that burned within Fëanor drove him to speak to the Noldor at Tirion, and convinced them with his charisma to return to Middle-earth, to seek vengeance against Melkor and have their own realms, thus fulfilling the purpose of Morgoth behind the lies that he told to Fëanor. Finarfin, who had not the charisma of Fëanor but had far more wisdom and temperance, spoke against this action softly, imploring his people to pause and think about the consequences of these actions. Yet many of the Noldor did not share the wisdom of Finarfin, save his grandson Orodreth, who also counseled restraint. Even Finarfin's children, who were great friends with their cousins, the sons of Fingolfin, such as Finrod with Turgon, or Angrod and Ignor with Fingon, wanted to go with them, even if they weren't exactly happy to leave the lands of Valinor. Galadriel, on the other hand, wanted to be gone, for she wished to explore the wide lands and rule a realm of her own. Yet still the Noldor would go to Middle-earth. Not wishing to abandon his people nor brothers, Finarfin dejectedly agreed to go. But he traveled in Fingolfin's host at the back, and led his people in the very back with his son Finrod, for the elves who were wisest, noblest, and most loath to depart were there. Often they would look back, reflecting on what grace they were losing in leaving, and eventually the light of the Tower of Mindan Eldelieva shone on them no more. However, at the front of the host, Fëanor and his folk would attack the Falamari of Olwe in the first kinslaying, and soon after this, Mandos or some other similar figure appeared before the host, announcing the doom of the Noldor, speaking to the kinslaying. At this, Finarfin would forsake the march, feeling great grief and bitterness towards his half-brother Fëanor for attacking the people of his wife and father-in-law. Some of Finarfin's people would go with him, but not even his own children would return with him, and so they were sundered, until much time and many deeds good and ill occurred, and he might reunite with them, beyond the breaking of the world with some. These elves would go on to Middle-earth, being the renowned House of Finarfin, and this family would achieve great renown and love in Middle-earth. Yet even so, Finarfin and his Noldor, likely with his wife Eärwen, who was either with him or had stayed in Tirion already, retraced their steps, coming back under the light of the Tower of Mindan, and so they received the pardon of the Valar, especially since they had not participated in the kinslaying. And so Finarfin would become king of the Noldor of Valinor, under Ingwe, the High King of all the elves, while Finarfin's brothers and their descendants would be High Kings of the Noldor in Middle-earth, until each king perished, and that role faded in the end. Though he was wisest of the sons of Finwë, and perhaps wisest of all the Noldor, this wisdom came with a certain amount of sorrow for Finarfin. He was never meant to be king, but now that his father was slain and brothers were gone, he had to take up the mantle. He would be separated from his children and brothers and kin, never to see many of them again until the world was remade, for many of them would be slain and come to the halls of Mandos, where I do not believe Finarfin could even visit them. However, Finrod's case was different, for after the death of that virtuous and wise elf, he would be re-embodied quite soon after his death by the Valar, and he would walk with Finarfin his father beneath the trees in the elven realm of Eldamar once again. Even as Finarfin ruled the Noldor in Valinor at Tirion, he would be called upon to lead his people in Middle-earth to fight in the War of Wrath. And so it was that he would at least see Middle-earth once, and those who had survived the First Age. Perhaps during this time he visited the graves of his sons and brother Fingolfin, and spoke to some of the other elves, those whom he had met and had not. And hopefully he was even able to see Galadriel and her husband Celeborn in this time, before he went back to Valinor for the ages of the world to come. Indeed, Finarfin continued his rule there, and his wisdom saw that at least some of the Noldor would never fade from Arda. During the Third Age, the fading of the elves had come in Middle-earth, and Finarfin would meet his granddaughter Celebrian when she sailed west after being attacked by orcs and healed by her husband Elrond. Years after this, Finarfin would surely rejoice in gladness to reunite with his daughter Galadriel, who had become quite wise in her own right, and he would meet his great-grandchildren Eladon and Elrohir when they surely sailed west in the Fourth Age. For all the pain he had endured, having been sundered from his family for so long, in the end the wisdom of Finarfin saw the preservation of the Noldor in Valinor, and he would be able to reunite and meet with old and new members of his family alike, even as he retained the wisdom, lore, and memory of the two trees, his father, the first High King, his brothers and their trials, and the many elves who were now gone from Arda, not to return until after the breaking of the world. Finarfin's wisdom would continue to lead the Noldor for all the ages to come in the world. And so we come to the end of our tale on Finarfin, father of Galadriel, and king of the Noldor in Valinor. From the story of Finarfin, we see that wisdom and tender-heartedness provide a much-needed, yet sometimes lonely road to walk. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts on Finarfin? Let me know in the comments below. This is a very amazing character, one whose story is tinged with wisdom and sorrow both, but I love knowing that this character was always there in Valinor, even during all of the later stories in Middle-earth. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons, Adrian De La Tour, Chris Ortner, Kyle Wetzel, Peter Shepard, Jonathan Putin, M. Mark Kralik, Blair Scouten, Merton, John Hume, Sam McBee, Matt Sabach, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibbs, Ben Gardner, Kondar, Reese Jenkins, Adam Petrulik, Kuzan, Brandon Glidden, Daniel Burns, Anthony Harmon, and Dorwin Gray. Thank you so much, and thanks to all of our patrons and YouTube members. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the free peoples today. And I'll see you all again next week with a video on who are the better crafters, elves or dwarves. You all are the best, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me in this adventure. Until the next one.